Great to have you here in a special edition of the John Fredericks Radio Network, booming our way across America. This is where America comes to talk in the morning. A very special edition to you, but I am live today with Your Royal Highness, Prince Turki Al Faisal of Saudi Arabia. He is the former Saudi ambassador to the United States. He's also the former ambassador to the Court of St. James and the former director of intelligence for the Saudi Arabian government, and we are at his private residence today. High security, as you know, so we can't tell you exactly where we are, but we are at his private residence, and we want to thank his longtime aide, Naila, for setting this up. Thank you very much, and Your Royal Highness, Prince Turki, with us now, and we asked to come by today because at the annual National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations Conference, Your Royal Highness made remarks yesterday at the luncheon that were very gripping about the relationship between Saudi Arabia, the United States, as it relates to the Trump administration. And I thought that was very relevant to our audience and didn't get picked up in mainstream media, so I asked for some time today with Your Royal Highness, and he was able to accommodate us, and we appreciate that. Prince Turki Al Faisal, welcome to our show. Thanks for being with us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know that you are heard widely, and so it's very appreciative of me to you that you give me this chance to speak to your audience.
Well, thank you very much, Prince Turki Al Faisal. In your remarks yesterday, you were talking about the new relationship now between the government of Saudi Arabia, the Trump administration, but moreover, the relationship with all of the Middle Eastern community. I was hoping you would spend a minute and elaborate on that, sir.
Indeed, since President Trump became president, his first trip outside the United States was to Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, to Saudis meant that he values the relationship between the two countries. And on the trip, of course, he met not only King Salman bin Abdulaziz, our king, but also the king had arranged for a summit of Arab and Muslim leaders to meet with the president. And they had 3 days of engagements and contacts between President Trump and 57 heads of state from around the world, in which not only the issue of terrorism was discussed, but also America's engagement with those countries in terms of development and economic support and business activity, etc., etc. An important aspect in our relationship with the United States is the issue of education. The kingdom for years now has been giving scholarships to Saudi students to come to America.
Right.
The number today exceeds 60,000 Saudis spread all over the United States.
That have come specifically for educational opportunities.
Yes, and
Prince
they
Turki.
go to all universities from east to west and from north to south, and they learn all sorts of disciplines from engineering to medical services to liberal arts, etc., etc. That is a very, very significant engagement between the Saudi people and the American people. And what makes me very happy, if you like, is that it is not only an indication that Saudi students want to come and study in the United States, but it's also an indication that their parents are happy for them to come to the United States. And you can imagine that during a student's life in the States is not less than 4, perhaps 5 years, and during that time parents and relatives come and visit, and so the circle widens of engagement and friendship between the Saudi people and the American people.
Now, Prince Turki Al Faisal, you also yesterday said that there is a dual responsibility between both the United States government and the Saudi government. And you laid it out in, I thought, pretty compelling terms when you said there's accountability here going forward on both sides.
Right.
And you talked about what the Saudis could do a better job of. And then you also talked about some of the issues that we have right now in the United States. And I was hoping that you could share that with our audience, Your Royal Highness.
The relationship between the two countries has been based on frankness. And our frankness with each other is important in order for us to be able to go forward and strengthen the relationship. And so over the years, since Saudi Arabia was established back in 1932, and the first contact took place between not just U.S. government and Saudi government, but people to people, many of our friends in America were either asked for advice or they offered it freely, and some of it, of course, was accepted, other things were not. And I thought it was the high time also that as friends of the United States, that we would offer views about developments in U.S. politics that from our point of view are either a bit puzzling or leave us uncertain as to where we're going in our future together. And I mentioned as a specific example of that the issue of your Supreme Court decision to allow the financing of political activity by corporations and by individuals without accountability, basically.
And you're talking about the Citizens United decision that's commonly referred to.
That's right. So that in itself raised eyebrows, not just in Saudi Arabia, but I think worldwide. Another matter, of course, which to us is very important, is the issue of the media. The media in America, of course, based on freedom of speech, has no legal boundaries. Whereas in terms of the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative branches of your government, there are legal boundaries. And that also raises questions as to whether there should be such boundaries for the media. These are all questions. I don't have any proper advice or formulas to present to you, but I would like you to engage with us in answering some of these questions.
Well, thank you very much. This is a special edition of the John Fredericks Radio Network. Across America, we are with Your Royal Highness, Prince Turki Al Faisal. He's the former Saudi ambassador to the United States. He's also the former ambassador to the Court of St. James and the former director of intelligence for the Saudi Arabian government. And he is with us now, and we're at his private residence, and we appreciate his time. Your Royal Highness, you talked about yesterday at the conference that we mentioned, you talked about in very stark terms the issue of your country and others in the Middle East grappling with extremism, terrorism, ISIS, whatever you want to call them, and that you were saying that your Middle Eastern neighbors and yourself really have to come to grips with the extremism that's going on that you said, I believe, hijack your faith.
Well, they're trying to hijack the faith, and they didn't hide their intentions. If you look at their broadcasts, whether in the social media or the statements that come out from them, they claim to speak for Muslims. And their ultimate victims of their terrorism, and the most numerous victims of their terrorism, have been Muslims. We in Saudi Arabia have suffered from this terrorism for the last 20 some odd years or more, since it began. And as a matter of fact, the first target for Al-Qaeda anywhere in the world was Saudi Arabia. Of course, this has required not just Saudi Arabia, but also other Muslim countries to mount a campaign to oppose these heretics who would want to steal our faith from us. And hence the kingdom has been very much in cooperation, not just with the United States, but on a worldwide basis, to share intelligence, to share know-how, and to combat this disease which has afflicted not just our countries, but countries around the world. And if you look at these terrorists who are now active and bringing mayhem and destruction everywhere, from Iraq, from Syria, from Saudi Arabia, from Yemen, etc., Pakistan, Europe, the United States,
right,
they all have one aim in their minds, which is to cow the world community to accept them as their masters. And this is unacceptable, not just from a Muslim point of view, but from any other point of view. And hence, we have been working through our relationship with the United States and other countries. And as you saw in President Trump's visit to the kingdom,
yes,
the inauguration of the Counter-Terrorism Center that was established in the kingdom for that purpose. But one important aspect in this is we had to look into ourselves as well and see if there was any hint or inclination or proposal from any sources within us that would have given these people some leeway or help or support and so on. And whenever we found that there were inclinations towards extremism, we've taken action against that with the help of our friends. And looking at statements that have come out from U.S. government sources about, for example, funding for terrorist activities, your department that is in charge of this situation has been cooperating closely with Saudi Arabia in order to prevent that from happening, not just from Saudi Arabia, but from any other source in the world.
We're with Your Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal of Saudi Arabia. He is the former Saudi ambassador to the United States. He's the former ambassador to the Court of St. James. He's a very long resume in Saudi government and in the kingdom, and he's also the former director of intelligence for the kingdom. And we have a special edition here of the John Fredericks Show, and we are live at Your Royal Highness's private residence, which for security reasons, well, we can't say where that is, but we are here and we are with him, and we appreciate the time. Prince Turki Al Faisal, let's go to Syria. It's been off the radar screen a little bit recently in the news, but still massive issues with refugees. Is the Saudi kingdom prepared to live with the perpetuation of the President Assad regime?
You know, when this uprising in Syria took place back in 2011, the late King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia tried to contact Bashar al-Assad, who is the president of Syria, and convince him that the way to deal with this uprising should be in peaceful terms, because the people who undertook the uprising were very peaceful. They weren't armed. They were simply asking for improvement in their lives and certain freedoms which had been denied them. Unfortunately, Bashar al-Assad turned the situation into a military confrontation between the government and the people of Syria. And in spite of all of the efforts made by Saudi Arabia to get negotiations going between Assad and the people that were rising for their own rights and so on, we failed. And hence, it wasn't just Saudi Arabia, but I think the world community came to the conclusion that the Assad regime is brutal, that it uses brutal methods to suppress their people, and hence the creation of the refugee situation, where now there are more than 6 million Syrian refugees around the world. Internally in Syria, there are half the population has been displaced because of the use of military means by the Assad regime to suppress the people. So the kingdom has taken the position and continues to take the position that the Syrian people must have a chance to express their view on what their future is and who their leadership is. That Assad is not worthy to be the leader of a people that he is killing on a daily basis.
Right.
And I've expressed in many circumstances and times that the unfortunate thing is that we are dealing in a situation where the tragedy is so vast. It's more than 500,000 people have been killed over the last 5.5 years in Syria. That is unacceptable.
Right.
And the world community, for whatever reason, continues in a manner of managing the situation instead of resolving it. And the biggest recruiter for terrorists in Syria today is Bashar al-Assad, because of the way that he is dealing with his people and killing them and destroying their homes and so on. So the kingdom is very much a member of the coalition fighting ISIS in Syria with the United States and I think more than 60 other countries that provide military hardware for that purpose. And we're also members of the Friends of Syria grouping that has been established since 2011 that has European and other countries, Arab countries, engaged in it. We have accepted in Saudi Arabia more than 2.5 million Syrians who have come to the kingdom from Syria, and we don't consider them refugees. We don't put them in refugee camps and treat them like refugees, but rather we give them residency permits and allow them to work and to live in the kingdom. And those who want to go somewhere else, if they can get visas to travel somewhere else, they are, of course, welcome to do so. But it is unacceptable for this situation to continue. And you know, Mr. Fredericks, in Syria today, there is enough military hardware by the Russians, by the Iranians, by the Americans, by the Saudis, by the Turks, by the Europeans, to establish a permanent ceasefire, if they're willing to do so. But unfortunately, they're not doing that. And all the ceasefires that we heard about with Russian inspiration or Turkish activity or so on, there have not been a mechanism to enforce the ceasefire. So the ceasefires don't last long. They may last a day or two, but then they're broken up. And I say that all our aim should be concentrated on stopping the killing in Syria. And we have the means to do that. And if there is any party in Syria that would oppose this principle, well, they will be dealt with, because there is enough Russian hardware, as I said, American and so on, to be able to do that. But unfortunately, they haven't done so.
Your Royal Highness, let's go to the Iranian situation, exporting terror throughout the region, as you know.
Yes.
And last week, the President Trump, after 10 months saying he's not going to recertify that they're complying with the deal that he doesn't like anyway. So that kind of is a red herring out there, and he's turning it over to Congress to do more sanctions. What is the kingdom's position on the Iranian deal, what Trump did with decertification, and what is the kingdom's vision of dealing with Iran going forward, sir?
After the president's statement, King Salman issued a statement expressing support for President Trump's statement on decertification or not. And the king concentrated also on the issue of Iranian activities in the area outside the nuclear deal, particularly the spread of the terrorists that they are using in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and in other places as well. And this is where I think there is a confluence of interests between Saudi Arabia and the United States in challenging Iran's very proactive attitude to interfere in the affairs of neighboring countries. And I was very pleased also to hear the commander of the Central Command, who gave a speech at the conference the day before yesterday, in which he said that the U.S. had taken the decision to provide whatever military aid and support to countries that need and face Iranian interference in the area. This is a welcome development, and if it had been the case 10 years ago, maybe we would not be in the situation where we are in today, where we see more than 100,000 Iranian-backed or fully deployed troops in Syria, for example, fighting the Syrian people in support of Bashar al-Assad. That to us is unacceptable. And fortunately now, with President Trump's strategy towards Iran being so clear in opposition to Iran's interference in the affairs of other countries, there is a sense of reassurance, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in the whole area, that Iran will be checked and that we will be able to face these challenges that they pose to us.
Let's move to our relationship with the State of Israel.
Yes.
And how that affects the kingdom, and what is the kingdom's position on our relationship with Israel going forward? What are some of the things that you would like to see resolved or changed?
You know, back in 2002, the late King Abdullah made a proposition to the Arab countries in which he said, let us devise a formula whereby we can have peace with Israel. And the way that the formula was presented was that should Israel withdraw from the areas that it occupied after the 67 war, and the Arab countries then can engage with Israel not only in diplomatic relationships, but in normalizing and ending the hostilities with Israel. The Arab countries in 2002 accepted that, and it became what is called the Arab Peace Initiative. From 2002 until today, unfortunately, no Israeli government has come forward to accept that proposition, even if they have their own conditions on it, but simply to say, okay, let us sit down at the table and we will discuss that supposition and that proposition. And until today, all the Arab countries are committed to that initiative that the late King Abdullah put forward. And I can't see for the life of me why Israeli leadership simply doesn't say, okay, you Arabs made this proposition, let us sit down and discuss it. They have refused to do that. And I think until and unless they do that, there is not going to be peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors. And the continuation of Israeli colonial occupation over Palestine is equally unacceptable. These people deserve the right to have their own country, and that is enshrined in all of the principles, whether humanitarian or religious or social or whatever you want. And we have much to do with Israel if there were peace. Just think of it, yani, the scientific engagement between 22 Arab countries and Israel on development of water resources, on combating disease, on devising new architectural parameters. All of these opportunities are there if we only had peace with Israel. And this Sunday I'm going to be speaking in a synagogue in New York, where a discussion of the Arab Peace Initiative will be held with Israeli leaders, and I hope that they will be able, when they go back to Israel, to convince Mr. Netanyahu that it is time to sit down and discuss the Arab Peace Initiatives with Arab representatives.
Your Royal Highness, has the kingdom ever asked the officials in the Israeli government exactly why they're not having a conversation with you about the peace initiative? I mean, have they given you a reason?
No. I remember I was at a conference in Munich a few years back, and I was in the audience when the then minister responsible for negotiating with the Palestinians, who was speaking, the former foreign minister, Ms. Tzipi Livni, was on the podium, and I was in the audience. And after she finished her talk, I asked her, I said, Ms. Livni, why haven't you accepted the Arab Peace Initiative and sat down with Arab counterparts and discuss it? And she went into a long explanation about how terrorists and other groupings were affecting Israel, etc., without answering my direct question. And I interrupted her and I said, Ms. Livni, all it takes is to say yes. And her answer immediate was, no, we're not going to say yes. So I was taken aback, because here was an opportunity for an Israeli government official to finally say, yes, okay, let's sit down at the table and we'll talk about it. But she refused. I understand that since then, unfortunately having left government,
yes,
she has come around to the idea of the Arab Peace Initiative as being worthy of discussion and negotiation.
Has the kingdom brought this up with President Trump when he...
Well, I'm not an official of the Saudi government, so I have not had any meetings with any American official. But I'm sure that when President Trump met with King Salman and other Saudi officials and with our Crown Prince, that they must have referred to the Arab Peace Initiative and encouraged President Trump to take it forward. And I must say, the President has already publicly expressed his view that he thinks that a deal is in the making, and that it's going to be a fantastic deal, and I hope that he will succeed in his endeavors, because we need that kind of leadership from America. On this issue, like on other issues, America cannot lead from behind. And it is very gratifying to see that someone like President Trump taking the lead in this issue and putting his foot forward and designating important negotiators to go to Israel, to meet with the Palestinians, to discuss this with other Arab countries.
We're with Your Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal, former Saudi ambassador to the United States, former director of intelligence for the kingdom, and we're at his private residence. If you had an opportunity right now to give a message to President Trump, what would it be?
Mr. Fredericks, I wouldn't presume to convey to President Trump a message. But as I said in my previous talk to you a couple of minutes ago, there's a lot of gratification in the Arab world, and particularly in Saudi Arabia, in President Trump's initiative, not only on the Arab peace with Israel, but also his personal commitment to fighting terrorism. And as I said, to lead from the front, not from behind. And his commitment to challenge Iran's adventurous politics and their interference in the affairs of other countries. So, Mr. Trump, please continue. You have made a lot of friends in the Arab world, and the kingdom has always considered itself one of those friends, and will be with you in all of these endeavors, inshallah.
All right. I want to thank you for your time and making
Thank you,
yourself
Mr. Fredericks.
available
it's a great
today.
pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. And whenever the kingdom would like to invite me to Saudi Arabia to do my show there for a week, I'll be happy to do it.
Well, you have my personal invitation to do that.
I will do that. Thank you, sir. With Your Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal here at his private residence, Saudi Arabia.